Hello, I'm Torvald of Torvald's Leatherworks, and this video is an informative and instructional one for my hardened leather gauntlets, which you see right here. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about my hardening method. Regardless of what you might think from just looking at my gauntlets, they are not specifically a wax hardened leather. I actually have a multi-stage process that involves hot water so that I can mold, shape, and dish it, and then it's oven baked. Then it gets a full immersion wax bath, and then it gets oven baked again. So I'm doing a little bit of every one of the various types of hardening methods in hardening my leather. The wax bath that I use also has a melting point of 180 degrees. So even if these were just wax hardened, you still wouldn't have to worry about a high temperature area being able to soften them. Because quite honestly, if it gets hot enough that it makes my armor soft, the last thing you're worried about is your armor. So the design of my gauntlet is actually based on a lock gauntlet. Now, a lock gauntlet is a type of gauntlet that does not open and close. Obviously, mine do. But the original lock gauntlet design essentially usually had a hinge point so that you could get a weapon into it, then you would hinge it closed again, and then you would put your hand in. And you would not be able to switch weapons or to switch hands if you're using a great weapon. And so that was a problem for a number of people in the SCA. And so with my design now, yes, you are able to open and close your hand, which then allows you to switch weapons and or switch hands while fighting. However, one of the things that it still has in common with a lock gauntlet is that it is designed to offer the maximum protection while your hand is completely closed. Okay, so when you're using my gauntlet, it is meant to stay closed at all times. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is actually I'm going to try and talk you out of buying my gauntlets. Yes, that's right. An armor merchant who's trying to tell you don't buy my gauntlet. Because what I'm going to do first of all is to discuss with you the negative feedback that I have received from people over the years using my gauntlets about problems that they've encountered with them. So the first thing is we're going to talk about using a spear or a pike, which in the SCA is a 9 to 12 foot long thrusting weapon only. There are no cutting blades on it at all. You're only allowed to thrust with it. Now, for myself, I've never had a big issue with it because I am a pull cue style of piker or pikeman, in that I keep both of my hands on the haft at all times, and when I thrust, I slide up through my leading hand and pull back. However, there are a fair number of people that like to use a method where they will let go with their leading hand and then make a full extension with their rear hand and then pull back. Now, this isn't specifically a problem. You can still do that with my gauntlets because obviously both gauntlets open and close, so you can let go with your leading hand. Where people run into trouble, though, is that they have a tendency when they make that extension, they allow their trailing hand to open slightly, and when that happens, they have had their thumb slide out from inside the gauntlet. Okay, so that leaves that thumb exposed. As long as you keep this hand closed, though, you can still do the full extension method. You've just got to get used to the idea of making certain that this hand stays closed and locked on the haft of your spear. Now, the other issue that has come up from time to time deals with using a great weapon, with people that like to be able to switch from one hand stance to the other hand stance while they're fighting with a great weapon. Great axe, glaive, halberd, bastard sword, and so on. Now, you can switch back and forth. It's not a difficult maneuver to do. But because of one of the protection or safety features of my gauntlets, it can be a little tricky. Now, I'm going to go into a little more detail about that safety feature here in a minute, but for right now, we're just going to talk about the use of great weapon. Now, personally, I fight with great weapons a lot. When I first started in the SCA all the way back in 1981, I was really into great weapons, especially great axe. That was my favorite weapon form. In fact, my former knight almost had to threaten my life on occasion to get me to pick up a shield. So, when using a great axe or a great weapon, the trick to this is that you want to choose one of your hands to stay closed and locked on the haft of your weapon at all times. Personally, I choose my right hand. I keep it locked on the haft of my weapon. To be able to switch to my other hand stance, because you can see here, I'm fighting with a left-handed grip. So to switch to a right-handed grip, I hold on with my right hand, I open my left, I turn the left hand over as I drop the weapon into my hand, and then I slide my right hand down. Be able to switch back, simply slide your right hand up, let go with your left, turn the weapon over, turn your hand open, and there you go. You've been able to switch back and forth. Okay. Now, the only time you're going to have an issue with this is if you want to try and pretend that you're Jackie Chan or Daffy Duck in the Robin Hood cartoon and try to fling this around like a quarterstaff, spinning it around your hands, around your neck, hoo-ha-ha, dodge, spin, thrust, parry. You're not going to be able to do that, okay? Because as I mentioned, one of the design features of my gauntlets, one of the protection features of my gauntlets, makes that very difficult to do that quickly and that fast. And we're going to get into those features now. So now, we're moving away from talking you out of buying my gauntlets into talking you into buying my gauntlets. Alright, the first protection feature of my gauntlet that is very different than most other gauntlets is that the finger plate section extends very far past the tips of your fingers. One of the problems that I noticed early on fighting in the SCA when using gauntlets as opposed to a hockey glove, which we won't talk about hockey gloves here, was that most gauntlets had a tendency to stop just barely past your fingertips, and in some cases they didn't get past your fingertips much at all. They were almost flush. And so you were constantly having your fingertips smashed from tip shots along those edges. So my gauntlets extend way past the tips of your fingers, usually by more than 1.5 inches. And that was why, when you're trying to switch hands back and forth, there's a fairly limited gap here between the end of the finger plate and the end of the thumb plate. And so it can be a little tricky being able to switch hands back and forth quickly. Now, if you're doing it the way that I just showed you, it takes about one fighter practice of practicing switching hands, and you'll get it down. It's not that difficult. Now, the second, and in my opinion the most important safety feature of my gauntlets, is that the finger plate is designed to bottom out on the haft of your weapon. This curve here is set up so that it rests right on the haft or grip of whatever weapon that you're holding. And you're going to have about 3/4 of an inch of clearance between your fingers and the inside of the leather. So there's a lot of clearance in there. So any blow that lands on the finger plate is actually going to be transmitted directly to the haft or grip of the weapon that you're holding and not your hand. The next feature actually has to do with the thumb plate. What you're going to notice here is that the thumb plate is not protecting my thumb. I'm going to open my hand here, and you're going to see my thumb is curled in. When I close up and the finger plate curls under the thumb plate, my thumb is now completely inside the gauntlet with the rest of my fingers. My entire hand is encased inside the gauntlet. I often call these the basket hilt you wear on your hand. So you'll notice, like I say, the thumb plate here now is not protecting my thumb. The only thing this is doing, at least while this is closed, is helping to complete the circle of defense of your entire hand. The only time that's even remotely protecting your thumb is if for some reason while you're out fighting you open up your hand. And the only time you should be doing that is when you're switching hands on the weapon that you're holding. Also, in terms of function, you've got a very wide flared cuff here so that you get full range of motion with your hand. Now, you've seen me hold the great weapon. I've got a small selection of hand weapons here, and these are wonderful for use with single-handed weapons. I use them myself a lot. The very first weapon that I ever designed for use with my gauntlets, and this actually goes all the way back to my original lock gauntlet design, was because that I suffer from arthritis, from a type of arthritis, and at the time I was having a lot of trouble with my grip, being able to hang on to weapons. So I designed my first gauntlet as a lock gauntlet, and then I designed this weapon. This is an SCA representation of a fire-hardened, iron-studded oaken club. Certainly plenty of examples on the internet if you want to find a war club. And so with this, in my old lock gauntlet, I essentially turned my entire arm into a flail. My friends hated it. As it is right now, my friends in my new local shire still hate it when I bring this thing out, because for me, this is a high-energy weapon. I cannot just sit back and be lazy with it. I've got to stand on your toes and drill you into the ground like a tent peg. I often make a joke that as soon as I pick this up, that my brow slants down, my jaw juts out, and everybody turns furry with big blue eyes. So my non-PC description here is that everybody just turned into a baby harp seal. But you can see here again, the finger plate bottoming out on the grip of the weapon. I have full range of motion. No difficulties here with being able to swing this any way that I want to. Next up, I have one of my famous rattan hand axes with the curved brass grip. I'm able to get a nice solid grip on this. I can still do a wrist snap with it with my fingers on the inside. Full protection to my hand. And then finally we have a cross-hilted sword here. You can see here fits perfectly. And once again, I have no issues with range of motion. And when used with my Bazoo bands, they are both designed, of course, to function together without binding up and again restricting any wrist motion. So there's your list of weapons. Now, these are meant to be padded, okay? I realize that the rules do not require it, but I am telling you, I strongly urge you to pad these in the way that I am about to describe. Now there's 3 parts of this that need to be padded. If you ignore everything else that I've got to say, you really still need to pad at least one part. This is the one that is absolutely critical, and it's not where you think. It's actually right here, right at the bottom of the thumb plate, right along the stitching between the thumb plate and the cuff. And the reason for that is that this section of the gauntlet, especially when you're using a great weapon, is going to rest right on this bony section of your thumb, right there. And so anything that comes down the haft of your weapon is going to land and get caught right there. So this area has got to be padded. All it takes is a 1/2 inch wide strip of camping pad foam, just like that right there, or even some of the gray foam or black foam that you can get at various SCA events. So you take a 1/2 inch wide strip and you run it on the inside here, right above the cross stitching on the cuff and the thumb. And you don't have to go all the way around. Just about 4 inches worth, just right across here, from the thumb through the arch of your finger and thumb. That's that leading edge there that's going to get hit. Now, the second spot that needs to be padded doesn't need to be as thick as that. You know, that's about a 3/8 to a 1/2 inch thick. You can go with 1/4 inch padding for this next spot. And that's going to be right across the back of the hand here, on the inside, right below your knuckles. You don't want it up on the knuckles, you want it down behind the knuckles. And when you're looking at the inside of the gauntlet, you're going to see a line of stitching here that's the top edge of the reinforcing piece on the back of the hand, and that's about where you want to put that piece. That one's not really horribly critical, but I still recommend you do that. Now the last section is probably the least critical for now, but it's going to become critical eventually, and I'm going to explain that in just a minute. And that's basically these last two sections of the finger plate, right across the end of the finger plate here, and then the next set up. You do not want to do it up here because that will interfere with the gauntlet opening and closing. But you want to do these first two sections here. And I'm going to explain why now. As I mentioned to you, the finger plate bottoms out on the haft of your weapon and on the haft of your great weapon or hand weapon. But someday, eventually, the leather is going to fail. Okay? If you follow my maintenance instructions, which I'm going to end this video with, if you follow my maintenance instructions, you should be able to get several years of wear out of my gauntlets. I got 7 years out of my original pair before I finally decided to retire them. So as long as you just follow my simple maintenance instructions, you should easily be able to get several years worth of wear out of them. But basically, the issue here about a gauntlet failure. If you're using a metal gauntlet and the metal fails, it caves in, crushes your fingers. When a plastic gauntlet fails, it splits, cracks, maybe even shatters, caves in, crushes your fingers. When a leather gauntlet fails, it goes mush. So if you've got these two sections padded up, like I've just told you to do, it's going to be like getting hit on a hockey glove. Bruises, probably. Broken fingers, unlikely. Okay? Because even if this softens up, you've still got to deal with the curves and the stitching. And it's really unlikely that both the curve, the leather, and the stitching are all going to fail all at the same time. But even if you have a catastrophic failure where everything dies right at that last moment, as long as the padding is in there, it's still going to be like getting hit on a softened up or old hockey glove. Strapping. Now, for the most part, these are going to come all assembled with all the strapping in place, except that the palm and the thumb strap are only going to be connected on one side. And the way that you get those set properly is that you're going to need to pad this up first, put on your glove, and I recommend a kind of a soft glove. Personally, I wear an elkskin glove. It's very much like a deerskin glove, except that it's just thicker. But a deerskin glove will work just fine, a goatskin glove will work just fine. You don't really want to use something that's really stiff, like a regular leather glove would be, a cowhide leather glove would be. And when you go to put your hand into here, you do not want the arch of your hand here between your thumb and your forefinger to extend past that same section of the gauntlet. You will notice that if you have that lined up properly, your thumb does not extend past the end of the thumb plate. Okay? Now, once you've got that in, you've got your padding in, you got your glove on, you put your hand in, you get it in the right position, you're going to take the palm strap and you're going to pull it snug across your palm. Now, this will come with a hole already punched on the far side here. You're going to trim off your palm strap, you're going to rivet it in place with the rivets that I also include. The thumb strap, on the other hand, is not going to be snug. You do not want it so loose that it can get into your palm and interfere with your grip, but you want it just snug enough so that your thumb can pull away from the thumb plate when you close up the gauntlet. And then you're going to rivet that in place. And again, there's already a hole there, and you're already going to get a rivet with it when you get the gauntlets. And so that's how you're going to pad it, that's how you're going to strap it. Now, if you want to use a padded glove, like a street hockey glove, that's fine. Street hockey glove, if you're going to do that, I recommend you use the gel padded glove rather than the foam padded one. It just seems to fit better. You can use either one, doesn't matter. Lacrosse gloves, maybe. Motocross gloves, sure. MMA gloves, fine. But most of the time, if you're going to use a padded glove, you're going to want to use a gauntlet size larger than what you normally would. So if you usually wear a medium glove and you want to use a padded glove, you're going to need to go up to a large on a set of my gauntlets. Personally, I still recommend that you just pad them up the way I just described and then use a regular glove. Now, the thing is, though, when you glue your padding in, You do not want to use a permanent glue. You're going to use a contact cement, but you want to use, say, just a regular, average household contact cement. You can get it at any hardware store. You do not want to use a permanent one, say, like Barge's cement, because Barge's cement is really a commercial grade contact glue, and it's meant for putting boot soles on. So you know how permanent that is. Now the reason I'm saying you do not want to use a permanent commercial grade glue is that we're getting now down to the maintenance side of this. For your maintenance, you're going to need to be able to take your padding out, okay? Because the maintenance is going to involve baking this in an oven. The instructions for that are on my website so that you can look it up anytime, but I'm going to tell you what the trick is here. When it's time to recondition these, you're going to pull your padding out. I also recommend that you untie the leather thongs that connect your finger plate to the rest of the gauntlet, because you don't want these drying out and getting brittle. You're going to untie these, pull your padding out, you're going to preheat your oven to 200 degrees. You're going to put these in on a cookie sheet and you're going to bake them for 15 minutes. Don't go over 20. If you go over 20, you risk warping the leather, okay? But 15 minutes, take them out, let them cool, glue your padding back in, tie the finger plate back on, you're good to go. I recommend that you do the maintenance at least twice a year. You can do it as often as you want. Actually, with my natural leather ones, sometimes you'll notice that when they get hit, you'll see this little spider web of impact fractures that run around on the surface. Those are not actually damaging the leather. Once you recondition them, though, with the natural brown leathers, they tend to just blend out and disappear. So I've got customers actually that will recondition their hardened leather from me after each time they use it just for the cosmetic effect. For them, the really nice byproduct is that their armor stays rigid pretty much indefinitely. Now there will come a time, eventually, from repeated pounding, that the leather itself will start to break down, and it isn't going to matter how much you recondition it, it's going to get soft. But for the most part, depending on how often you fight and how much you take care of your gear, you should still be able to get years of wear out of them. I have rarely ever heard of any of my hardened leather lasting less than 3 years, and that's with people that don't do any maintenance at all and don't really take care of it. They just let it go until it dies. Now, for storage, I would say that you're just fine leaving it in your car, but just don't leave it where light can be refracted directly on it, because that can get it up over 180 degrees and it would risk warping. If you're going to store it in your trunk, no problem at all. Just don't put anything heavy on top of it. Less heat, lots of pressure can malshape it. If you're going to store it, put it in a tub, stick it in your vehicle, you're fine. Personally, for all of my hardened leather gear, I use a professional hockey goaltender's equipment bag. Nice thing about that, it's got a nice solid plastic bottom, got some rollers on it. It also ventilates so that there's no humidity buildup inside the bag. While mold and mildew are not going to be a big issue because of the waxing that this goes through, it can still build up on the surface, and for that, just wipe it off, stick it in the oven, bake it, you're good to go. Do not ever put leather conditioning products on my hardened leather, because you have to remember, leather conditioning products, oils and creams, are there to soften leather. And that's the last thing you want to do with this. If anything, if for instance you notice that you've got a cut or a scrape, not just an impact, if it's a pretty deep gash or scrape, get yourself a small cake of beeswax, rub it on there to coat it, and then bake it in your oven, and that'll help seal up that cut. But do not use oils, do not use leather creams. So, I hope that I've been able to answer all of your questions on this, and if you have any other questions, you're perfectly free to contact me on my website. Have fun and stay safe.